At 3:50 in the morning on the 18th of April 2016, motion-activated surveillance cameras inside Creekside Church of Christ recorded a figure forcing entry through a side door with a pry bar. For the next 30 minutes, the cameras tracked someone dressed head to toe in tactical police gear, a black helmet hiding the face, a heavy vest marked police, gloves, shin guards moving through the empty church with a hammer in hand. The figure opened doors, smashed glass, peered into classrooms, then kept walking, slow, deliberate, unhurried. The church sat isolated off Highway 287 outside Midlothian, Texas. No alarm system was active. At 4:18 a.m., headlights cut across the parking lot as a white Ford F-150 pulled up to the main entrance. A woman stepped out, carrying exercise equipment, and walked toward the door unaware she had less than 20 minutes to live. Terry Leanne Bevers went by Missy. She was 45 years old, born the 9th of August 1970, in Graham, Texas, and raised in Jacksboro as the middle child between two brothers. She graduated from Tarleton State University in 1995 with a teaching certificate in special education and spent years working with students who had special needs before her first daughter was born in 2001. She married Brandon Bevers on the 20th of June 1998. They had 3 daughters together, Hannah, Allie, and Sarah, and by 2016, the family had settled into a rhythm that revolved around school schedules, youth sports, and the small-town cadence of Midlothian. Missy had found fitness later in life, but once it took hold, it became something close to a calling. She became a certified Camp Gladiator instructor, leading early morning boot camp classes that combined cardio, strength training, and a kind of relentless encouragement that people either loved or avoided. Her clients described her as someone who never met a stranger. She posted motivational messages on Facebook, checked in on members who missed class, and had a way of making 5 o'clock in the morning feel less punishing than it should have. Her last post went up the evening of April 17. Rain was forecast for the next morning. She wrote that the class would move inside the church if necessary. No excuses. You are gladiators. If it's raining, we're still training. The arrangement with Creekside Church of Christ was informal but reliable. The church allowed Camp Gladiator to use the building when weather kept classes out of the parking lot. Missy had done it before. She typically arrived early to set up cones, check the space, and prepare for the handful of people who showed up at that hour. On the morning of April 18, she left her house before 4 o'clock. She drove alone. Her husband Brandon was 600 miles away in Biloxi, Mississippi, on his annual fishing trip with friends. The trip had been planned for weeks. Phone records and travel logs would later confirm he was nowhere near Midlothian that morning. Missy pulled into the church parking lot at approximately 4:18 a.m. Surveillance footage from a nearby outdoor sporting goods store had captured her truck passing by moments earlier. She parked near the main entrance, grabbed her gear from the truck bed, and walked toward the doors. She entered through the front, unaware that someone had already been inside for nearly half an hour. What happened in the next few minutes was never recorded. The interior cameras were motion-activated, capturing segments of movement but not continuous footage. Investigators believe Missy walked into the building and turned her head at some point, likely the moment she realized she was not alone. A forensic podiatrist who later reviewed the unreleased footage for the FBI described that instant as the moment that stays with you, because you know what's coming. The confrontation occurred somewhere inside the church, in a hallway or room not directly monitored by the cameras that had been recording the intruder's movements. No one heard screaming. No one heard a struggle. The church sat far enough from the road that sound would not have carried. At some point between 4:20 and 5 a.m., Missy Bevers was struck repeatedly with what investigators believe was a hammer or similar tool. The Ellis County Medical Examiner later determined she died from multiple puncture wounds to the head and chest. The injuries were severe. She was found still wearing her wedding ring. Her purse, iPad, and phone remained untouched in the truck. Nothing was stolen from the church. The doors to several rooms had been forced open. Glass was broken in multiple locations, but nothing of value was missing. The first students arrived for class shortly after 5 o'clock. They entered through the main doors, calling out for Missy, and found her body inside. One of them dialed 911 at 5 a.m. Midlothian police arrived within minutes. The church was immediately secured. Officers found the side door where the intruder had entered, the broken glass scattered across tile floors, the tools left behind. A hammer was discovered near Missy's body. Forensic teams documented the scene, photographed evidence, and began the slow process of cataloging what had occurred. The surveillance footage was reviewed that morning. What they saw would become one of the most widely circulated pieces of evidence in modern American crime. A figure in full tactical gear, face completely obscured, walking calmly through empty hallways with a weapon in hand, breaking glass for no apparent reason, opening doors and moving on. The footage ran just over 2 minutes when compiled. It showed the suspect entering the building at 3:50 a.m., wandering through the interior until approximately 4:20 a.m., and then vanishing from camera range. The timestamps aligned with Missy's arrival. Investigators concluded the suspect had been lying in wait. The tactical gear made identification nearly impossible. The helmet covered the entire head. The vest and padding obscured body shape. Heavy gloves concealed hands. Shin guards and boots altered the natural stance and gait. The only visible characteristic was movement, the way the figure walked. Police noted several distinctive features. The suspect's feet turned outward, especially the right foot, in what is sometimes called a duck-footed stance. The pace was slow, with occasional steadying contact against walls. There appeared to be difficulty moving the right leg or foot, though whether this was due to an injury, the weight of the gear, or simply natural variation remained unclear. Some segments of the footage showed what search warrants later described as a feminine sway or walk, though investigators were careful not to draw conclusions. The FBI eventually brought in Dr. Michael Nierenberg, a forensic podiatrist, to analyze the gait in 2021. Nierenberg conducted his own experiments, wearing similar tactical equipment and observing how the added weight and bulk affected movement. His findings were definitive in one respect: gender could not be reliably determined from gait analysis alone, especially when the subject was wearing heavy gear that fundamentally altered natural biomechanics. The out-toed walking pattern, he noted, was common in the general population. The estimated height based on the footage and the helmet was somewhere between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 feet 7 inches, though the gear added bulk that made precise measurement difficult. The suspect appeared to be carrying extra weight but not obese. Beyond that, the disguise had worked exactly as intended. The investigation expanded rapidly. Midlothian police requested assistance from the Texas Rangers, the FBI, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. A task force was assembled. Detectives began with the most statistically likely scenario: someone close to the victim. Brandon Bevers was cleared within days. His alibi was airtight. Phone records, credit card transactions, and witness statements placed him in Mississippi from the night of April 17 through the morning of April 18. Friends confirmed he had been fishing with them. Surveillance footage from gas stations along the route matched his vehicle. GPS data from his phone triangulated his location hundreds of miles from Texas throughout the relevant time window. There was no possible way he could have been in Midlothian that morning. His cooperation with investigators was immediate and total. He provided access to phones, computers, financial records, and personal communications without hesitation. He submitted to polygraph examination. He answered questions for hours without requesting an attorney. His grief appeared genuine to experienced detectives trained to detect deception. Detectives moved on. They began examining Missy's personal life. What they found complicated the picture. Search warrants filed in the weeks following the murder revealed that the Bevers marriage had been under strain. Financial pressures had mounted. The couple had discussed separation at various points, though friends and family described the relationship as stable enough that divorce did not seem imminent. More significantly, investigators discovered that Missy had been involved in communications described as intimate in nature with someone outside the marriage. The relationship had begun around January 2016 on LinkedIn, starting as professional and friendly before becoming flirtatious and then more personal. The individual was identified and interviewed. He acknowledged the communications but denied any physical relationship and confirmed he had been nowhere near Midlothian on the morning of the murder. His alibi checked out. Detectives also uncovered another detail. Days before her death, Missy had shown a friend a private message she had received on LinkedIn from someone she did not know. She described the message as creepy and strange. The sender was eventually located and questioned. He admitted the communication had been flirtatious but insisted it was innocuous. He too had an alibi. The threads were investigated but none led to an arrest. Attention shifted to Brandon's father, Randy Bevers. 4 days after the murder, Randy brought a shirt to a dry cleaner. The shirt had visible blood stains. The timing raised immediate suspicion. When questioned, Randy explained that the blood came from a fight between his 2 dogs. He had been traveling in California at the time of Missy's death and provided receipts, hotel records, and witnesses who confirmed his location. Forensic testing on the shirt confirmed the blood was canine, not human. He was cleared. The physical resemblance between Randy and the figure in the surveillance footage had been noted by internet sleuths and amateur investigators, but the evidence did not support involvement. Investigators moved on again. The gear itself became a focus. Where did it come from? Was it authentic law enforcement equipment or a costume assembled from surplus stores and online retailers? Brandon Bevers later described the outfit as shoddy, not real tactical clothing. The helmet appeared to be a standard riot helmet available through multiple vendors. The vest, while marked police, did not match any specific department's issued gear. The lettering appeared to be generic, possibly applied with iron-on transfers or purchased from costume suppliers. The shin guards and gloves could be purchased online without identification. Detectives canvassed military surplus stores, costume shops, and sporting goods retailers in a 100-mile radius. They requested purchase records for tactical equipment sold in the weeks leading up to April 18. They reviewed online marketplace transactions, eBay, Amazon, Craigslist. They contacted manufacturers of riot helmets and tactical vests requesting customer lists. The search produced no definitive leads. Thousands of people purchase tactical gear every year for paintball, airsoft, security work, law enforcement training, or simply personal interest. Tracking a single buyer among that volume proved impossible. The gear could have been accumulated over months or years. It could have been borrowed, stolen, or assembled from items already owned. Without the physical equipment in hand, forensic analysis of manufacturing marks, wear patterns, or trace evidence was impossible. A separate piece of evidence emerged from SWFA Outdoors, the sporting goods store located near the church. Surveillance cameras at the store captured a vehicle believed to be a 2010 to 2012 Nissan Altima circling the parking lot around 2 a.m. on the morning of the murder. The driver's behavior was erratic. The car entered the lot, circled slowly, flashed its headlights for no apparent reason, parked briefly in a secluded area, then left. The timestamp was approximately 2 hours before the suspect entered the church. Investigators attempted to identify the vehicle and driver, but were unable to make a definitive connection. The license plate was not visible in the footage. The theory that this was the suspect conducting reconnaissance before the attack remained just that, a theory. The vehicle was never located. The investigation generated massive public interest. The surveillance footage went viral almost immediately. News outlets across the country ran segments featuring the eerie images of the figure in tactical gear walking through empty hallways. The contrast between the peaceful church setting and the armored intruder created an image that felt simultaneously surreal and terrifying. Social media communities dedicated to true crime seized on the case. Reddit threads, Facebook groups, and YouTube channels dissected every frame of the footage, analyzed the gate, compared it to potential suspects, and generated theories that ranged from plausible to outlandish. Frame-by-frame analysis became obsessive. Users created side-by-side comparisons of the suspect's walk with videos of cleared individuals. They measured stride length, analyzed foot positioning, and debated whether the figure appeared male or female. Some claimed to see distinctive features in the grainy footage that professionals had missed. Others developed elaborate conspiracy theories involving multiple perpetrators or staged crime scenes. Missy's family became targets of online harassment. Brandon's daughter Hannah later spoke publicly about receiving messages accusing her father of the murder despite his verified alibi. Other individuals who had been investigated and cleared found their names and photos circulated online, their lives scrutinized by amateur detectives convinced they had solved the case. Employers were contacted. Neighbors were questioned. Lives were disrupted. The Dallas Observer later reported that internet sleuths had muddied the waters and wrecked lives in their rush to identify a suspect. Midlothian police repeatedly emphasized that certain individuals had been cleared and that public speculation was not helpful. They issued statements asking people to direct tips to official channels rather than engaging in vigilante investigation. The warnings had little effect. The internet had claimed the case as its own. Tips flooded in from across the country and internationally. By the time the case reached its first anniversary, investigators had received over 1,500 tips. By the fifth anniversary, that number had surpassed 3,000. Each tip required evaluation, follow-up, and documentation. Some were credible. Most were not. A few came from individuals convinced their neighbor, coworker, or estranged family member was the killer, based on nothing more than a perceived similarity in build or gait. Detectives worked through them methodically. They traveled to other states to interview persons of interest. They reviewed hours of additional surveillance footage from businesses along Highway 287 and surrounding roads. They re-interviewed witnesses multiple times. They built timelines, cross-referenced phone records, and analyzed digital communications. Nothing produced a viable suspect. The motive remained elusive. If the crime had been personal, an act of jealousy, revenge, or rage connected to Missy's private life, the suspect pool should have narrowed. If it had been a crime of opportunity, a burglary that escalated, there should have been evidence of theft or panic. Neither scenario fit cleanly. The tactical disguise suggested premeditation and a deliberate effort to avoid identification. The 30-minute window between the suspect's entry and Missy's arrival suggested the attacker knew her schedule and had positioned himself to intercept her. The lack of theft suggested the burglary was a cover. Yet no clear personal connection emerged that pointed to a specific individual with both motive and means. Investigators theorized that someone close to Missy or close to someone involved with Missy had orchestrated the attack, but they could not prove it. The case stalled. Years passed. Midlothian police maintained that the investigation remained active and was not considered cold. The distinction was important. Cold cases are typically those where all leads have been exhausted and active investigation has ceased. This case was different. A dedicated team continued to meet regularly to review evidence, evaluate new tips, and pursue emerging leads. Commander Byron Stewart took over leadership of the investigative effort. He brought in a part-time retired federal investigator with expertise in internet-based leads and digital forensics. The department partnered with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit to develop a psychological profile of the suspect. The profile suggested someone with knowledge of the victim's schedule, familiarity with the church layout, and enough premeditation to acquire tactical gear and plan a 30-minute window inside the building. The profile indicated someone comfortable with violence, capable of close-range confrontation, and disciplined enough to avoid leaving identifiable evidence. It narrowed the suspect pool in theory but not in practice. They consulted with forensic experts on gait analysis, tactical gear sourcing, and crime scene reconstruction. DNA evidence from the scene was limited. The tactical gloves had prevented fingerprints. No biological evidence definitively linked to the suspect was recovered. The tools left behind were common brands available at hardware stores across the country. Trace evidence analysis produced no breakthrough. In 2024, police announced they were deploying artificial intelligence to assist in analyzing the massive volume of data accumulated over nearly a decade. The AI system would review tip records, cross-reference communications, identify patterns in language and behavior that human investigators might have missed, and potentially connect disparate pieces of information buried in thousands of pages of reports. The technology represented a new frontier in cold case investigation, but results remained pending. The department acknowledged that traditional methods had reached their limits. Technology offered a last hope. The reward for information leading to an arrest grew over time. It began at $10,000 shortly after the murder. Anonymous donors increased it to $50,000 within months. By the 5th anniversary, it had reached $150,000. Crime Stoppers of Ellis County continued to accept anonymous tips. Billboards were erected along major highways featuring Missy's photo and the surveillance image of the suspect. Playing cards with case details were distributed to inmates in Ellis County jails in the hope that incarcerated individuals might recognize the gate or possess information. Annual vigils were held at Kimmel Park in Midlothian. A memorial stone was placed in April 2023. Missy's family attended each year. Brandon remarried. His daughters grew older. The pain did not diminish. Brandon Bevers' perspective on the case evolved over the years. In early interviews, he expressed certainty that Missy had been specifically targeted, that the murder was not random, that someone had planned it with precision. By 2024, in interviews marking the 8th anniversary of her death, he acknowledged he no longer knew what to believe. The possibility that the crime was random, that Missy had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, seemed more plausible to him now than it had in 2016. Investigators, however, remained convinced that the evidence pointed to targeting. The timing, the tactical disguise, the 30-minute wait inside the church, the lack of theft, all of it suggested intent. But intent without identity remained a dead end. The paradox at the heart of the case is inescapable. Modern surveillance technology captured the killer on video. The footage is clear, well lit, and shows the suspect from multiple angles over an extended period. Yet the tactical disguise rendered every identifying feature invisible. Gender, age, race, hair color, eye color, facial structure all obscured, even the gait. Was the suspect someone Missy knew personally? Someone she had encountered in her professional life? Someone connected to her through the fitness community? The Camp Gladiator network was extensive. She interacted with dozens of clients, fellow instructors, and gym members. Any of them could have developed an obsession, a grievance, or a misplaced romantic fixation. Was it a romantic rival? A jealous partner of someone she had communicated with? A former client harboring a grudge over perceived slights or failures? Investigators looked at individuals who had stopped attending her classes, who had posted negative reviews, who had expressed anger in online forums. Was it someone who attended the church, who knew the building layout, who understood the lack of exterior surveillance and the patterns of early morning access? Creekside Church had hundreds of members. Staff and volunteers had keys. The building was used by community groups throughout the week. Tracking everyone who had access proved impossible. Or was it a stranger? Someone who had fixated on Missy for reasons unknown, who had followed her social media posts and learned her schedule, who saw an opportunity in the early morning darkness and acted on impulses that remain incomprehensible. This theory troubled investigators because it suggested randomness where the evidence indicated planning. Each theory had proponents. Each had been pursued to dead ends. None had proof. The frustration was compounded by the knowledge that the answer existed somewhere in the accumulated data, in a tip that had been dismissed, in a connection that had not been made, in evidence that had been misinterpreted or overlooked. The case remains open. As of early 2026, nearly 10 years after Missy Bevers walked into Creekside Church of Christ and was murdered, the 2010 to 2012 Nissan Altima seen on surveillance footage has never been located. The individual who sent the creepy LinkedIn message has never been charged. The 3,000 tips have led to cleared suspects, dead ends, and exhausted leads, but not to justice. Midlothian police continue to receive calls. Commander Byron Stewart continues to lead the investigative team. Missy's daughters have grown into adulthood without their mother. Hannah, Allie, and Sarah carry memories of someone who believed in them, who pushed them to be strong, who never met a stranger. Her mother visits the memorial stone at Kimmel Park. The community has not forgotten. But memory is not the same as resolution. The cameras captured the crime. They could not capture the criminal.